analyzed your defensive capabilities as being unable to withstand us. If you defend yourselves, you will be punished.
As always, I want to thank my newest patron supporters, Edd Mark Starr, Nelson Fu, and Jeff Ferrel. Thank you for helping me keep the lights on here. In case you've not seen my last video, this video is part 1 of a 64,297 part series on the Borg. No, not him, them. Today, we're going to focus on the first chronological appearance of the Borg, the Enterprise episode, Regeneration. Now, before some of you argue that First Contact came before because it took place about 100 years earlier than Enterprise, let me just say that so clearly, Enterprise should come first. Regeneration is kind of a paradox to me. First of all, it is the first encounter with the Borg and Starfleet chronologically. True, the events of First Contact took place in an earlier year, but both the crew of the Enterprise and the Borg themselves were from the future. So yeah, setting was, well, before this episode, but all the main characters, with the exceptions of Cochrane and Lily, were from the 24th century. So in effect, this is a 24th century encounter with a 21st century setting. After all, the Enterprise chases the Borg back in time, prevents the Borg from changing history, and they went back forward in time, and only 2 people knew about it at all, and only one of them, Lily, even saw the Borg. Captain Archer would really be the first Starfleet captain to have an encounter with the Borg, even if he had never heard their name. Archer lived and died centuries before Picard was sent across the galaxy by Q to meet the Borg for the first time. So, while this episode was the first in chronological order, it was also, interestingly enough, the last to air. This episode originally aired in Enterprise's 2nd season on May 7th, 2003. Prior to this, the last time we saw the Borg was almost exactly 2 years earlier in Voyager's season finale, Endgame, which aired on May 23rd, 2001. Now keep in mind that Enterprise is often hailed as the series that killed the franchise of Star Trek, and while most would agree that the show drastically improved for season 3 and 4, it was too little too late. So the general consensus is that Enterprise is the worst Star Trek show, and Enterprise was at its worst during the first 2 seasons. And here we have a season 2 episode featuring the Borg. We've already got 2 strikes against it, and frankly, my expectations going into this were very, very low. The show opened with the title card, Arctic Circle, Earth, as we see a ship fly by. A few scientists walk about on foot and find the wreckage of what appears to be a huge spherical spacecraft. Okay. Let me stop right here for a moment. Now, I know that the scanning technology in Enterprise is not as advanced as later Trek shows, but this debris field is huge. It's also only half buried in the ice. This brings up a couple of problems. First, why after 100 years would it still be exposed to the air? While the ice may not have swallowed up these ships, it certainly would have been buried under 100 years of snowdrifts. But second, like I said, the scanners may not have been as good as in later Star Trek, but are you seriously trying to tell me that a debris field containing millions of tons of exotic material and even an active warp signature, as one of the scientists will soon discover, was never picked up by human or Vulcan scanners as they approached Earth over the last 100 years? Well, sure enough, a few seconds later, they find a perfectly preserved Borg in the ice, buried about 2 inches under the ice. Roll credits. So, after the credits, the female scientist, while walking around using the same tricorder she just used to find the Borg drone buried under the ice, well, you gotta see this. She literally trips over another Borg. So, yeah, maybe we were just assuming that it's a tricorder. It's really just a futuristic iPhone 752 and she's trying to take a selfie or something. I don't. So in a bold move, the writers decide to say, that's right, one Borg perfectly buried in the ice, while the other just a few inches of snow, and they're about 10 feet apart. That's science because of quantum. So the science team take in the drones to examine them, because after being buried in the ice, there's no way that anything bad could happen, right? Anyway, Science Lady tells Science Man that she ran a carbon date on the wreckage and determined that it has been there for about 100 years. Ugh. Okay. Yeah, that is not how carbon dating works. Look, I'm not an expert on radiometric dating methods or anything like that, but I do know this much. Every living thing on this planet has a specific percentage of carbon-14 in their bodies. Every plant, animal, and human have the exact same amount. It has to do with living in this environment, consuming organic material, respirating, and everything. Well, when a living thing dies, it no longer refreshes its carbon-14 through respiration and consumption, etc. Therefore, the radioactive molecules begin to decay. Since we can very precisely measure the amount of carbon-14 in an old bone, a piece of wood, etc., and we can measure that decay rate, we can calculate how long ago it died based on how much carbon-14 is still in it. So, for Science Lady to run a carbon dating test on the Borg wreckage is frankly beyond stupid, especially since there are two perfectly preserved dead bodies right there in the same room that she could have run a carbon test on and gotten accurate results. But then this is post Star Trek The Next Generation Star Trek, where the mantra is, and spare me the it's the future thing, because they did not use quantum dating like in later Treks. At least that is a fictional dating system. She specifically said she was carbon dating this piece of wreckage. And while the 22nd century, I'm sure they are much more able to accurately and quickly measure the carbon in an object, I'm still fairly certain that even in the 22nd century, non-organic material is still non-organic. The science team find that there are nanites inside the Borg that are repairing their cells. This is not a threat to them, because look how friendly the Borg appear to be.
Let the regeneration process continue. What if it revives more of their systems? We don't know anything about this species, or what they were doing here 100 years ago. There's no reason to assume they're hostile. They don't exactly look friendly. Starfleet has asked us to find out everything we can. Keep them here for now. We'll see what happens.
Man, I really feel bad for that guy. He looked at the facts that a giant ship crashed here 100 years ago. Aliens they cannot identify were on this ship and appear to regenerate from any injury, even being frozen for 100 years, and it looks like they have weapons and armor built right into their bodies. He sees all this and realizes that we should most likely try to make sure we are in a controlled environment for safety. And all his boss is like,
Nope, we'll just let nature run its course.
So, nature runs its course. That is, the Borg wake up and immediately assimilate the entire team. Meanwhile, back at Starfleet Command, Admiral Forrest is informed that they've lost contact with the science team, so they investigate. We are now over 10 minutes into this episode, and we get our first glimpse of Enterprise. Some people complain that they spend way too much time doing the setup. Those same people happen to subscribe to my channel and complain that I spend way too much time at the beginning of my videos thanking my Patron supporters. This episode gets a +1 to its score because they wrote it the way I write my videos. Archer quickly fills in the crew while showing them pictures from his Facebook page of the Borg drones. Granted, they don't know that they're called that, but he tells his crew that these are cybernetically enhanced aliens that may have kidnapped the science team. They also apparently took the science team's ship that was only capable of warp 1.4 and left Earth at warp 3.9, so they obviously have the ability to drastically improve technology. And then they just happen to be going in the general direction that Enterprise is in. Reed and Dr. Phlox work together to try and understand the data gathered by the scientists. Lots and lots of information.
The researchers gathered a great deal of biometric data on these aliens, but I'm having trouble making heads or tails of it.
How can I help?
Well, this arm might contain some sort of weapon. If I can determine its yield, we'll have a better idea of what we're facing.
Then Reed says something that still kind of has me scratching my head.
The research team was heavily armed.
Why would a research team in the North Pole be heavily armed? What exactly does Reed even mean by heavily armed? I just remember seeing one of the guys with what looked like a gun. Frankly, that line should have been Reed telling him that the research team was lightly armed, maybe just with stun weapons to deal with wildlife, and that it should have been no surprise that they could have been overpowered. Whatever. So Enterprise gets a distress call, and sure enough, it is the aliens. They have continued to improve the science ship, and now they're attacking a freighter. When they try to hail the ship, they're attacked, and Reed comments, and I'm not making this up, that their ship should not be armed. So what happened to the heavily armed research team? So they can carry guns, but their ship is defenseless? Okay, whatever. So the Enterprise clearly outclasses the Borg ship and disables their weapons quite handily. Borg immediately warp away, and Archer decides to stay and rescue the survivors on the freighter. Now, some people criticize Archer's choice to stay behind when there was a clear threat from the Borg. However, I disagree for two reasons. Number one, Archer is a man who believes in the sanctity of life. He would never leave someone to die if he has a chance of saving them. And number two, yes, granted, Archer had no way of knowing this, but had they left the freighter, they would have just doubled their problems, because the freighter would have become a second Borg vessel. And in fact, chances are that if that happened, at least one of the now two Borg ships would advance themselves to a level at which Starfleet could not stop them, and the Federation would be assimilated before it was even formed. So they rescue the two survivors, and Phlox finds that they are infected with nanites that seem to be transforming them into cyborgs. Further, the nanites are self-replicating, so there's no way to simply remove them from the host. Also, based on scans of the Borg ship, the humans on that ship are infected and being transformed into Borg as well. Now, of course, T'Pol suggests putting them in isolation for safety, but Phlox says they're not dangerous. Let me get this straight. They have an obvious, contagious, and synthetic infection that can transform you into a mindless cyborg, but they're not dangerous. I'm sure that one's not coming back. Archer read up on Zefram Cochrane's speeches from after First Contact, which he describes the Borg, time-traveling cyborgs who want to enslave the human race. But of course, everyone thought he was nuts. And in fairness, if Stephen Hawking suddenly started saying that time-traveling aliens attacked him back in the 60s in order to stop him from creating modern black hole theory, but humans traveled back in time to save him, well, we would probably all figure that he was nuts as well. T'Pol asserts that Cochrane was, well, very well known for telling stories and was frequently intoxicated, ignoring the fact that these aliens were in fact cyborgs just like Cochrane described, that they were from Cochrane's time, and that they apparently enslave anyone they come across. In other words, T'Pol is ignoring the facts because she wants to continue to believe that time travel is not possible. Meanwhile, in sickbay, yeah, they're not dangerous at all, right, Phlox? For some reason, the two new Borg inject Phlox, but not the security guard, and then leave. Now, at this point, you may be thinking that I'm going to go off about the fact that every time Borg injects someone in the past, they've almost immediately become drones, but now Phlox has plenty of time before he loses control. But no, I'm not going to complain about that because they write in a reason. I've said many times, it's perfectly okay to change things as long as you provide an explanation. And in this episode, Phlox mentions later on that the nanites have trouble dealing with his Denoblian immune system. So the process takes longer with him. So good for them. They wrote in and out, and it actually made sense. Our two young Borg are crawling around the Jeffries tubes, obviously looking for something to do on the Enterprise. T'Pol finds that the Borg ship on scanners is now moving at warp 4.8, so they are continuing to improve their systems. Reed finds the Borg in the maintenance area and tries to disable them, but they adapt almost instantly to their weapons, so they blow them out the airlock. Makes sense. Hoshi has had nothing to do, so she has a moment with the doc. Honestly, I know we're supposed to feel bad for him and all, but I can't help but think that it serves him right for thinking the Borg were not a threat. Reed and Tucker are trying to figure out how to disable the Borg stuff that they put in the ship, and Archer and T'Pol have a discussion about the moral dilemma of destroying the Borg ship versus attempting to rescue the humans. And this is the real strength of this episode. Everyone, with the exception of Hoshi and Mayweather, are faced with real challenges to their beliefs or their skills, and these character moments are actually pretty well done. Archer Archer and the sanctity of life versus the hard reality of needing to stop the Borg. T'Pol and the fact that the Borg seem to contradict her beliefs about the existence of time travel. Phlox facing an unstoppable virus. Reed dealing with weapons and defenses he's never seen before. And Tucker having his ship infected with Borg technology. Everyone is challenged right where they should be most comfortable. Well, like I said, except for Hoshi and Mayweather. Strange that the Borg would not challenge the Asian girl and the black guy. I guess the Borg are not equal opportunity. Oh my God, even worse than I thought. After kicking the heroes down, the episode now shows how our heroes will adapt. Archer and T'Pol come to the conclusion that they must do whatever is necessary to protect themselves, but also whatever is possible to save the infected on the ship. We next go to the Doctor, who has something of a breakthrough. On the one hand, the nanites are slowly making progress towards assimilating him. On the other hand, he figures out that they are vulnerable to Omicron particles, so exposing himself to a large dose of Omicron radiation might cure his infection. Reed works on improving the output of the phase pistols to compensate for the Borg defenses. He massively improves their destructive power. Now, by the way, this is kind of interesting because on Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Voyager, etc., we keep seeing them retune their phasers simply to different frequencies. Reed just gets the brilliant idea of, hey, why don't we just hit them harder? And it kind of works. Enterprise catches up with the Borg, and they have increased the mass of their ship by 3%. Obviously, over time, the ship will continue to grow in both size and power. They must be stopped. So, Hoshi finally gets something to do. She gets a transmission that she immediately recognizes an activation code, and just tells Archer about it. So Archer tells her to block it, but she can't. Tucker reports that all the Borg stuff in the maintenance area just came online. This is not good. The Borg circuitry shuts down main power and weapons on the Enterprise. Now that the Enterprise is disabled, the Borg hail them and give them the following ominous message.
This is Captain. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile.
Before I move on, I know some people complained about the fact that it seems rather contrived that they did not start their message with, "We are the Borg," like they always do. Well, first of all, they don't always do this. If you notice in the episode Q Who, which we'll be reviewing next, the Borg never identified themselves as the Borg. The only person that tells Picard who they are is Guinan. Further, even if they did say "we are the Borg," it sounds like the transmission may have been cut in midway through. So I'm going to give them a pass on that. I know they only did it in the name of continuity, and they've already broken continuity, so whatever. Now that Enterprise is helpless, the Borg can just beam over and assimilate everyone. But instead, they choose to just start shooting the Enterprise from their ship. So while things are exploding around the bridge, Archer asks Tucker for weapon status, which he says will be a few minutes. So he quickly decides to beam over to the Borg ship. Meanwhile, Phlox is on the verge of assimilation and is trying to crawl into the radiation chamber to test his cure, which is, of course, to have Star Trek Voyager threshold beam directly into your brain. Archer and Reed beam over to the Borg ship and start to fight their way to the EPS doohickey to stop the ship, and 6 Borg beam over to the Enterprise to assimilate Enterprise. Reed and Archer kill 4 Borg with their phase pistols, and the crew of the Enterprise kill 2. Then the Borg adapt. Kind of. Reed and Archer reach the doohickey and start planting bombs, and the Borg decide they do not like that, so they come after them. And Reed and Archer then proceed to kill 3 more Borg with phase pistols, after they adapted to the updated phase pistols on Enterprise. Anyway, they place their bombs, and the Borg have adapted to their phase pistols again. And then the Borg walks so slow that it's amazing that anyone would feel threatened by them. Seriously, just look at how slow they are walking here. So Reed and Archer only have about a half an hour or so before the Borg will reach them, so they beam out and blow up the doohickey. The 4 remaining Borg decide that they would much rather keep their old ship than to assimilate the far superior Enterprise, so they beam out just in time for Enterprise to blow them all up. In the epilogue, we find that Phlox's cure worked, but he was also able to hear the collective for a brief time, and he knew exactly what they were doing. They sent out a signal to the Delta Quadrant, giving Earth's location, meaning that in 200 years or sometime during the Next Generation era, the collective will receive this message. So the Borg will no doubt be coming in 200 years. Okay, let's talk about the good and bad of this episode. On the good side, they managed to make the Borg scary, even though this is well after they were neutered by the writers on Voyager. For years, they took 2 surviving drones and made them into a credible threat to all of Starfleet. They were defeated, but it felt like a race. Had the Borg upgraded their ship just a little bit more, Enterprise would have lost, then Earth, then Vulcan. The whole of the Alpha Quadrant would have fallen. And in my opinion, this was one of the best treatments we've seen of the Borg since Best of Both Worlds, and easily one of my favorite episodes of Enterprise overall. On the bad side, well, they kind of broke the timeline a bit. They may have made the Borg actually a little too powerful. Let's start with the research team. We see that they made detailed scans of the wreckage of the Borg sphere and the drones before they were assimilated. Further, Starfleet had access to those scans. They knew that their technology was far superior to anything Starfleet had. 200 years before Picard encountered the Borg for the first time. Besides just having a general knowledge of the Borg, Dr. Phlox actually comes up with an effective cure for assimilation. And with a little work, some kind of Omicron radiation beam just might prove to be an effective weapon against the Borg since it breaks down their technology. They also made it clear that the nanites can revive dead Borg tissue, effectively making them unkillable unless you disintegrate them or kill them using Omicron radiation. But we've never seen any other instance of a dead drone just getting up and repairing itself. I'm going to give Regeneration a 7.5 out of 10. This is a great episode for Enterprise and a good outing for the Borg. In fact, one of the best. Oh, and by the way, the 200-year message thing I can deal with. That's a red herring. The Borg came to Earth because of the events in Q Who, not because of this message. The message being the reason the Borg invade really would have only worked if the first appearance of the Borg was First Contact and nobody knew where they came from. They came because of a message sent 200 years ago that they themselves would then send, creating one of those infinite time loop kind of things. But Q Who did happen, and that is where we'll go next time. Until then, take care.
We are the Borg. Resistance is futile. You will lower your shields and click on the like button and leave a comment for the anti-tricker. If you have not before, you will hit the subscribe button and the notifications icon so that you can hear more from the anti-tricker. If you have suggestions on how to improve this channel, you will leave a comment in the comment section below. If you appreciate the work put into these videos, you will go to https://www.patreon.com/Michael J. Crawford, link below, and support this channel. Excuses are irrelevant. You will comply.